Good afternoon, everybody. It appears that we are live. My name is Bear with BearIndependent.com, and today on the brief we're going to be discussing the international ramifications of the COVID-19 lockdowns that are ongoing. Bear brief. What is today? 6/21, published now on Patreon. Fabulous. So let's go ahead and come over to here. OBS is not my primary skill, OBS being the broadcasting software, so I appreciate all of y'all hanging with me on this. We're going to go over here and do this. Fabulous. Tremendous. Believe it. The best brief. It's beautiful. Everybody tells me it's lovely. Believe it. Believe it. Bear Independent brief, 6 October 21. Today we're talking about world news and the implications that it has for us here in the Estados Unidos, United States of America. What was called, quote, the extreme COVID lockdown, end quote, by USA Today in early August is dragging on and on. In early September, it was reported that Australia was going to live with, air quote, live with the virus. But now, almost a month later, Melbourne is hitting record numbers even with 2 months of lockdowns. Residents are being blamed for the outbreaks due to hosting sports watching parties in their homes. Yes, it's your fault, you people. If you could just do a better job of cucking for your government, then we wouldn't have these issues. How dare you? How dare you exercise your personal liberties? Frustration is mounting in Melbourne during what is now the 6th lockdown, which is designed to end on the 26th of this month. Sydney's lockdown rules are expected to lessen on the 11th, 5 days away. Vaccine passports are in use in multiple countries around the world, from Brazil, Canada, Denmark, and Japan to Luxembourg and Liechtenstein to the United EU, European Union. Some countries are requiring them for citizens to perform day-to-day activities. The Financial Times mentioned in a recent article that vaccine passports were highly successful, their perspective, in France, where, side note, they are cheering, "We have beheaded our leaders before." We have beheaded our leaders before, and praise Yah for those people. In France, where people had to obtain one to use long-distance public transportation, go to a cafe or movie theater, and so on. In Israel, where most people are already fully vaccinated, up to 1 million people in the country will lose their vaccine passports unless they get a booster. The country, which had previously had one of the highest daily infection rates, is now seeing a significant contraction of the disease. I don't necessarily personally trust the numbers. I feel as if they have been played with for a long time. Because a month ago, 80% of all new COVID cases, the reporting was 80% of all new COVID cases in Israel were amongst the vaccinated. So what happened? Did we just change the way that we report that, or did we change the way that we record that? Action steps for those of us in the United States. What are your lines in the sand? I was just sent an article earlier today by a brother where NICUs, neonatal intensive care units, in Long Island, New York, will no longer allow your children who are in the neonatal intensive care unit to remain in their care if you or they are not vaccinated. I am reading a book, and I'm trying not to editorialize here, but I am reading a book here called IBM and the Holocaust by Edwin Black, as part of my cycle 2 of 75 hard, minimum of 10 pages per day. And if you look at the technology and the use of statistics and information to categorize a people and motivate one group of people against another group of people, it is not at all difficult to draw certain parallels between what was done in the 1930s in Germany and what is being done today, 80, 90 years later, around the globe. It's scary what they, the big they, can do with information. So what are your lines in the sand, and what decisions do you need to make ahead of time? And what are your threat indicators? Got a video on this in the Prepper Classroom here on YouTube about threat indicators. What do you need to be tracking? For us, they're pretty basic. Economic collapse, civil unrest, tyranny, food shortage, overwhelming force. There's a handful of them, but you need to take those and apply those to your specific situation, and then be gathering information and intelligence daily and weighing that intel and information against your specific threat indicators so that you can come up with your own matrices as to whether or not it's time for you to GTFO, bounce out of Dodge. From a Bear National in New Zealand, quote, "Today I was pulled into the office and instructed if I don't get the vaccination shot, my employment would be terminated as a correctional officer of 12 years. I am also a volunteer firefighter, and there has been talk that the same would apply to us at the fire station. Well, after listening to you for the past couple of years, I am at ease. If I was to lose this job, it will be okay. And the fire department, well, they can't even keep it staffed. Best of luck to them. And to you all out there, Bear Nation, love from New Zealand." And then we've got several articles here, the links to which have been provided to you in the YouTube and Patreon descriptions. So let's bounce over here. The best, believe it. And hey, we are still allowed to have a live stream. So encouraging. Shalom to everybody in the chat. I appreciate y'all so much for supporting the show. Somebody dropped a $100 bill. Jared F., the disturbance in the force is strengthening, stacked to the rafters. Bless you, Jared F. Thank you so much. Tavar 7 and all the blue wrenches. Shalom. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys and girls for supporting the show. Please do us a favor. If you know somebody who needs to see this, share it out to them. That helps us with our ongoing battle against the YouTube algorithmic robots. And they're kind of like T-1000s from Terminator 2. You know, we got to bob and weave a little bit. Sometimes you shoot like a 40mm high explosive grenade into them and they explode and they, you know, they're intense robots. So every time you share one of these or you tell somebody about the Bear Independent channel, that helps us greatly. From MSN.com, New Zealand to use vaccine certificates as Delta persists. Well, naturally, as one would do. Wellington, 5 October, headline Reuters. Dateline, Reuters. The words, best words, tremendous. New Zealand said on Tuesday that it will start using COVID-19 vaccine certificates as proof of inoculation at large events and other high-risk settings from next month. High-risk settings. You could drive a truck through that phrase. Sorry, sir, this church is a high-risk setting. You are not allowed to be here without your vaccine passport. As the country battles the spread of the Delta variant. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who on Monday abandoned a long-standing strategy of eliminating coronavirus in the face of a persistent Delta outbreak, said the certificates would help ensure large gatherings such as music festivals did not become super-spreader events. "We will use them, vaccine certificates, as a tool to lessen the risks at what are currently considered as high-risk settings, including large-scale events." Again, the issue there for me would be, first of all, "your papers, please," is not a phrase that I approve of, period. Next, how do we define, and really how do they define, because it doesn't matter what we think, we no longer have a representative republic. How do they define what a large-scale event is? Is it 10 or more people? That's what Bible study looks like at my house, on like, pick a day of the week. Or at any of my brother's houses, right? That's a large-scale super spreader event. We're sorry, we've got to shut you down. Negative, I don't think so. Urging the people, Ardern said at a news conference, urging people to bring forward their vaccination plans. These are now common overseas, and they make good sense, she said, adding that they are unlikely to be needed in places like health services and supermarkets. Unlikely. New Zealand was among just a handful of countries to bring COVID-19 cases down to 0 last year, and largely stayed virus-free until an outbreak of the highly infectious Delta variant in mid-August frustrated efforts to stamp out the transmission. That's because it's an aerosolized respiratory virus. It exists in the air. It's like oxygen, bro, or nitrogen. It's just there. You're just going to have to deal with it. So if your benchmark for success is 0, you're screwed. And now, I'm not a doctor, nor do I play one on the YouTubes, but I do have a at times, a modicum of common sense. And if it's in the air, bro, your likelihood of success at combating the air is probably going to be pretty low. The country will now use vaccinations and testing to control the spread of the virus, with experts warning the change will lead to a rise in cases. New Zealand recorded 24 new cases, 24 of COVID-19 on Tuesday, taking the total number of infections in the current outbreak to 1,381. About 48% of the adult population is currently fully vaccinated. The largest city of Auckland, which has been in lockdown for nearly 50 days, will remain on high alert, although its 1.7 million people will be allowed some extra freedoms from Wednesday. They will be allowed some extra freedoms from Wednesday. Thank the Creator, I live in the United States of America. And even so, we have to keep our eye on the ball here. You will allow me some extra freedoms, I will allow you to kiss my hairy white ass. That is not how this works. Your job is not to protect me. The end. I will handle that for me and my household. Thank you very much. From Al Jazeera, America's favorite frontline news network, Al Jazeera, 100% legitimate, no bias whatsoever. Australia's far right gets COVID anti-lockdown protest booster. Check this out. I've got an article pulled up here. We're going to do a little bit of bouncing this afternoon. Tactics and Counterinsurgency, FM 23-24.2. Tactics and Counterinsurgency. I've referred to this document over and over again in the last 18 months or so because this just keeps playing out. And so I'm going to read a little bit from FM 3-24.2 from Section 2-22 Objective. Insurgencies normally seek to achieve one of three objectives: to overthrow the existing government in order to reallocate power, to expel whom they perceive to be outsiders or occupiers, or to seek to create or maintain a region where there is little or no governmental control that they can exploit. Insurgents' objectives include struggles for independence against colonial powers, the rising up of political, ethnic, or religious groups against their rivals, and resistance to foreign invaders. The central issue in an insurgency is the reallocation of power. Usually, an insurgency mounts a political challenge to the existing state through the formation of a counter-state, which is promoted as an alternative to the existing state. Understanding the root causes of an insurgency is essential to analyzing the insurgent's objectives. Effective analysis of an insurgency requires knowing its strategic, operational, and tactical objectives. These objectives can be psychological in nature, physical in nature, or a combination of the two. So from strategic objectives, the insurgents' overall political goals are their strategic objectives. The set of required conditions that define the achievement of the insurgents' objectives are their desired end state. Examples of strategic objectives include: overthrow an established government, establish an autonomous national territory, cause the withdrawal of a foreign occupying power, or extract political concessions. Operational objectives. Insurgent operational objectives are those that insurgents pursue to destroy government legitimacy and progressively achieve their political end state. These are the means they use to link tactical goals with strategic end states. They often target the government's inability to address the root causes that lead to the insurgency. The insurgents' operational objectives define their overall campaign plan, although most insurgents will not have a formal campaign plan. These objectives are based on the insurgents' strategy across political, military, economic, and social objectives. So, the thing to understand here, the reason I bring this up in context of this article from Al Jazeera, is because of the absolutely skewed reporting on the air quote far right here. The case is being made among many leading media outlets around the world that the far right is the equivalent of domestic terrorists, that there is an ongoing insurgency taking place by those people that have far-right tendencies, including nationalism, including vaccine hesitancy, including a love of liberties and personal freedoms. In other words, people like you and I are being painted to be the basis of, the mass base of a political, ideological insurgency throughout the developed world. The problem with that, potentially, is A, that it's untrue, and B, many of the world's superpowers have been engaged in fighting counterinsurgencies for the last 20 plus years. Do the math on that one. So from Al Jazeera.com, Melbourne, Australia. Recent anti-lockdown protests in Melbourne have exposed the rise of the far-right movement over fears stemming from the coronavirus pandemic, unemployment, and continuing lockdown measures. The most recent and arguably most violent protests were sparked by the state government's decision to suspend work on building sites for 2 weeks and make vaccination mandatory for construction workers. Construction workers protesting at the trade union's office in Melbourne, Australia's second biggest city, were joined by several other groups, many from far-right backgrounds. Now, again, we must understand, this is propaganda. That's fine. But while we may know this, there are many, 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 many more people that are going to treat this as gospel, or at least, I'll take it with a grain of salt. This is propaganda. We know it's all made up. This is all puppy dogs and unicorns. This is fairy tales. Okay? The vast majority of people will not understand that. Even if they don't accept it outright, it will still skew their perception of those considered to be far right. Those anti-vaccination people, those liberty people. We talked about this on Insurrection Day, that those on Insurrection Day allowed the media to co-opt the term patriots here in the United States of America and tie the term patriots to domestic terrorism. That was a huge fail. Back to the article. The protest soon turned violent, with police responding with rubber bullets, tear gas, and pepper spray. Very quickly, we saw freedom marchers, there's that word, join the protests with other right-wing antagonists. Far-right analyst blah 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 said from blah 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 blah. Then that gave the impression of being a much larger movement than it necessarily was at the very beginning of that day. It's gone from a couple hundred of angry trade unionists to several thousand people. The protests have focused attention once again on the far right in Australia. Here comes the tie-in, see this. 2 years after an Australian white supremacist attacked 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, killing 51 people. Okay, well, New Zealand is not Australia. Yeah, they're neighbors, but it's not Australia. And this is 2 years after that, and one thing has nothing to do with another. However, they're painting this picture in this propaganda piece. Condemnation of the September rallies was widespread, with Labour Member of Parliament Bill Shorten publicly dismissing the protesters largely as hard-right man-baby Nazis because they want their individual liberties honored, because they want to be able to go to work and earn a living to feed their families, because they don't feel that the government has the right to control every facet of their life. They're hard-right man-baby Nazis. Okay. But Ruse, who has previously advised governments about such groups, says such stereotypes are simplistic and misleading. He says for Australia to combat the far right, notice the language, to combat the far right, people need to understand what it is and that such groups are more than just jackboots and swastikas, even if they have previously held public displays of Nazi symbolism and salutes. Do you see who you are being grouped in with here? Quote, the far right is a lot more nuanced. It has evolved and taken new shapes and morphed into something far more sophisticated than that stereotype, meaning that we can take this supposition that all these people are loonies and we need the government to protect us from them and apply it not just to one small group of people, but stretch that blanket statement out over as many, many, many more people now who don't agree with us. The far right is a lot more nuanced. It has evolved and taken new shapes and morphed into something far more sophisticated than that stereotype, he said. The far right has its vocabulary. It has far right discourse. It's anti-Semitic. It's racist. It's anti-Muslim. It's primarily anti-women. Blah, 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 blah. Then they tie such believers in liberty and freedom to conspiracy theories, circulated primarily on social media, include the belief that COVID-19 is a hoax that the vaccine is designed to kill people, or that the recent rollout of 5G technology is to blame for the pandemic. And this article goes on and on and on. It ties all of this to a racist history throughout the world, as well as, if we scroll, the interest in getting people back to work, and then how somehow, after spending the last 18 months without being able to go to work, you are now a racist and a domestic terrorist if you don't agree with the government's air quote right to tell you to stay at home. This is a hit piece. It's propaganda, but it's important for us to realize that these things are out here. So, next article from CNN, everybody's world-renowned, highly trusted favorite news source. Battle over divisive vaccine passports erupts in Rio de Janeiro. São Paulo. Dateline São Paulo. CNN. So-called vaccine passports have been reinstated in the Brazilian city of Rio de Janeiro just one day after a local judge suspended them from being too divisive. You know, before we dive into this article from Brazil, let's talk a little bit more about Australia. The thing to understand about Australia is that in many cases, there are for Americans, there are certain canaries in the coal mine. South Africa is one. Australia is another. Great Britain is a third. And we, Americans, and I know we have an international audience, so what's up to everybody on either side of the international date line? I appreciate y'all. But we as Americans have to take stock of what is happening around the world to people who more or less are ideologically aligned with us. There's a lot of lessons for us to learn here. I've heard it said over and over again, well, the reason they can't get away with that here in the United States is because we've got the Second Amendment. Your rights don't matter if you don't exercise them. I will repeat that. Your rights don't matter if you don't exercise them. It does not matter how fast your car can go if it sits in the garage all the time. It doesn't matter how much your AR-15 costs if it sits under the bed and you've never zeroed it. Your rights don't matter if you don't exercise them. And so when we posit the question like we are today, are domestic U.S. lockdowns imminent here in the United States of America? Question mark. What does the data tell us? It's definitely possible. The question is it plausible? I would say, for me, it's a coin toss right now. And as we'll see a little bit later in the brief, America is not a homogenous group when it comes to this. There are people on either side of the paradigm, on either end of the spectrum with this. And we're going to talk about 11 governors who are like, no, here in a hot minute. But for us as Americans, when we look at Australia, canary in the coal mine. So in Brazil, back to this article on Brazil. At the request of the city government, Brazil's Supreme Court on Thursday annulled a ruling by Judge Paulo Rangel that had briefly prohibited requiring the proof of vaccination to enter certain public venues. Residents will again be required to prove that they've been vaccinated in order to attend events and enter communal facilities such as gyms, museums, and tourist venues. Rangel had described the requirement as tyrannical. Quote, "The decree to implement vaccine passports divides society into two types, the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, preventing the unvaccinated from circulating freely." Back to IBM and the Holocaust by Edwin Black, separating people into groups usually ends poorly for the people who are separated into the smaller group. Over 500,000 Brazilians have died in the pandemic, the highest death toll in the world after the United States. Again, I don't believe these numbers. I think that it's possible to say 500,000 Brazilians have died in the time period described as the pandemic. I don't think it would be accurate to say, my opinion. Again, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm just some guy in eastern Oklahoma who talks at an iPhone. But I think it would be more accurate to say 500,000 Brazilians have died in the time span in which the pandemic was going on, rather than 500,000 Brazilians have died from the pandemic. Those are two very different statements. Back to the article. Today, some form of vaccine passport is in place in more than 200 other towns and cities across Brazil, including in the country's biggest city, São Paulo. Each regional authority decides its own regulations. Rio's vaccine pass system was introduced in mid-September under Mayor Eduardo Paes. Without mentioning the suspension directly, Paes tweeted, "Sometimes I wonder, how can people accept that smoking is banned in the office, the mall, the subway, and also accept that the use of seatbelts is mandatory? Do these people not feel restricted in their individual freedoms?" Shut up. Back to the article. But Rangel is hardly alone in his doubts about the system. President Jair Bolsonaro, who also has long downplayed the severity of COVID-19, has battled such precautions and openly criticized the idea of a vaccine passport. Bolsonaro, which sounds delicious. That sounds like a really good Italian dish. If I could get a veal Bolsonaro, sounds wonderful. Yeah, maybe with a little marinara on the side and some garlic knots and one Sicilian slice, but cut it in half and put half of it in a to-go box because I won't be able to eat all of that. Also, do you have fried ravioli? That'd be great if you do. Bolsonaro personally flouted vaccination rules at the United Nations headquarters in New York earlier this month, addressing the global body in person despite not having received the vaccine. Quote, "Why do you take a vaccine? To have antibodies, right? My antibody rate is really high. I can show you the document," said the president, who recovered from COVID-19 last year. So, more data points from Brazil. Now to Israel. Israel makes booster shot mandatory. Fabulous, tremendous, believe it. Hey, do we still have a live stream? We still allowed to do what we do? It appears as if we do. 1,300 people on. I love you guys. Bless y'all. Thanks for hanging out. Lynn Wilkerson's here. Stalwart Peacekeeper Tavar. Lumph. The best. Ask anyone. Believe it. Lumph has the best tomatoes. They're tremendous. They're the size of melons. Lovely melons. Wonderful tomatoes. Tasty. Delicious. Pert. They're pert tomatoes. Israel makes booster shot mandatory. Latest updates from trtworld.com. Again, you have links to all of this in the description. So if I'm ever accused of propagandizing, I'm simply reading the news to you, providing all of the supporting documentation and evidence, and editorializing a little bit and offering my opinion a good bit. Sunday, 3rd of October 2021, Israel makes booster shot mandatory. Israel has restricted its Green Pass to allow only those who have received a vaccine booster dose or recently recuperated from coronavirus to enter indoor venues. The new criteria means that nearly 2 million people will lose their vaccine passport in the coming days. They had it, but now they're losing it because they took jab 1 and jab 2 but haven't taken the booster jab. Israel is the first country to make a booster shot a requirement for its digital vaccination passport. Sweet. That's going to end greatly for everybody, I'm sure. The move is widely seen as a step to encourage booster vaccination among those who have yet to receive a third dose. Under the new guidelines, people must have received a booster shot to be eligible for a Green Pass. Those who have received 2 vaccine doses and those who have recovered from the coronavirus will be issued passes valid for 6 months after the date of their vaccination or recovery. At least there's one single ray of sunshine in the dark steel cloudy sky of vaccination requirements here, and that's if the acknowledgement that recovering from COVID gives you the same or more antibodies. We all know it's more. The same or more antibodies as the vaccine does. It's gene therapy, but whatever. But the World Health Organization and health experts have appealed to wealthy nations to think about millions of unvaccinated people in poor and developing countries before mandating the booster shots. Pick your poison here. Is capitalism evil and therefore we have to give away all of our largesse, including our vaccines, or does everybody need a third jab? I love it when there's this push-pull dichotomy of when wokeness defeats wokeness. I love that. It's because it's untruthful, and untruthfulness cannot stand on its own. The truth always wins. It's like, you can't build a very tall mountain of bullshit. It'll fall over. I have cows. Ask me how I know. Sometimes I get bored, and I like Play-Doh. And anyway. And then it goes on from here. Death toll hits another high in Russia. I don't care. And this, again, you have the links if you want to read the remainder of the propagandizing that takes place in this article. Now, Governor Stitt here in Oklahoma. Governor Stitt to attend Republican governor's news conference at U.S.-Mexico border. Let's give credit where credit is due. I became aware of this by watching the Forward Observer Situational Awareness Report this morning. I think it's 10 Central. They do it every morning. They got Dustin on there. You got Mike on there occasionally. Really good content. And so if you're trying to stay up to date on all the happenings in the world, I believe they do this 5 days a week on Forward Observer, Forward Observer, Forward Observer. If you can't spell Forward Observer, you've probably self-selected out as far as being able to gain any value from what they're saying over there anyway. So, Forward Observer YouTube channel. I gain nothing from telling you that monetarily. I don't care. I'm not shilling for them. I am subscribed to them, and I like their content, and I pay attention to what they do. So I would recommend, if you're not subscribed, go over there, say hi to Dustin, say hi to Mike, tell them Bear sent you. There's good content. So, Stitt to attend Republican governor's news conference at the Unidos Estados Mexico border. Oklahoma's Kevin Stitt, will be one of 11 Republican governors attending a news conference at the U.S.-Mexico border on Wednesday. That's today. Stitt's office confirmed on Monday. That was 2 days ago. The news conference, hosted by Texas Governor Greg Abbott, will highlight 10 border security recommendations from the Republican Governor's Public Policy Committee, Stitt spokesperson Charlie Hananamanamanamana said. That is a hell of a sentence. I don't know who wrote this sentence at Tulsa World, but they were probably high on caffeine or something else. That's too many syllables without enough punctuation in one sentence. Back to the article. Few details of the event have been released, but news reports indicate that it is set for midday Wednesday at Mission, Texas, a border town just west of McAllen on the Rio Grande. Besides Stitt and Abbott, GOP governors expected to attend are Arizona's Doug Ducey, Georgia's Brian Kemp, Idaho's Brad Little, Iowa's Kim Reynolds, Montana's Greg Gianforte, Nebraska's Pete Ricketts, Ohio's Mike DeWine, who I have on good authority is a Republican in name only and kind of a scumbag. I don't know personally, I don't live there, but I know a bunch of people in Ohio that seem like good people, and they all seem to hate DeWine. Maybe I'm wrong. South Dakota's Kristi Noem, who I think is a badass. I actually follow her on Instagram. She's always like riding horses and shooting guns and praying with people, and I'm like, yeah, that's what governors should do. That's awesome. And Wyoming's Mark Gordon. Even though Oklahoma is not a border state, Hananamanamanamana said, the Stitt administration believes the surge in people trying to cross into the United States from Mexico without documentation is related to a surge in illegal drugs and human trafficking reported by the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs Control. Now, I don't know everything there is to know about anti-human trafficking, but I do know a thing or two, and I can confirm that there has been an uptick in human trafficking in the state of Oklahoma since November of 2020. I don't know what it is that happened in November of 2020, but it's almost as if mysteriously something happened here in the Estados Unidos. And then, boom, all of a sudden there was this explosion in people being bought and sold as product. And when I say people, let's be clear here. We're talking the average human trafficking victim is between 8 and 12 years old, and the average victim has been serially raped a minimum of 30 times. And the average offender is responsible for 70 victims. So that means if you can jam up one offender, you've prevented 2,100 violent rapes. And I'm going to get pissed off and emotional if we keep talking about this, but this is part of our mission at grindstoneministries.com. This is why we're building Caleb House, which is a rescue and rehabilitation facility for these children who have been bought and sold as product by perverts for money, and this has been exploding exponentially here in the state of Oklahoma because some bastard somewhere in D.C. decided that he's going to change the way things ought to be so that it's not just we have a security crisis on the southern border, which we do. We have children that are being serially raped because some asshole somewhere stroked a pen across a piece of paper. Deep breath, Bear. Deep breath. The extent to which there is a connection, however, is unclear. Disagree, Tulsa World. Disagree. Abbott, who some view as a potential GOP presidential candidate in 2022, has complained loud and long about the surge of immigrants trying to enter the country through his state's southern border. More dramatically, Abbott promised to use state funds to complete border barriers whose construction was suspended or canceled by the Biden administration. He also ordered state law enforcement officers to detain suspected illegal immigrants and wants to turn a state prison into an immigrant detention facility. All told, Abbott has committed $1.8 billion in state funds to border security. And the article goes on from here. Governor Greg Abbott, other governors gathered here in this 1 minute, 12-second snippet of a speech from the AP embedded in this Tulsa World article. If you would like to check that out, you've got the link in the description, both on YouTube and on Patreon. Shout out to the patrons for supporting the show. And then the question really here is COVID-19 going to be bad enough? Is it bad enough to institute the type of changes in the world, A, that we've been seeing, B, that we predict we will see with a certain level, a higher level of probability, and C, will those lead to potential American lockdowns, which is really what we're supposed to be talking about today on today's broadcast. And so, from the World Economic Forum itself, weforum.org, our favorite supervillain Klaus Schwab, COVID-19 and the Great Reset. You can click this. There's an hour-long speech. This reptilian guy, he's not a reptile. I don't know. I don't believe in that. Maybe. Blink twice. Okay. The COVID-19 coronavirus crisis has wrought economic disruption on a monumental scale, contributing to a dangerous and volatile global upheaval. Global upheaval. You don't need to put people into camps unless there's a global upheaval, right? Politically, socially, and geopolitically, while raising deep concerns about the environment. Yeah, I know mostly that's what I'm concerned about in the last 18 months is like, you know, everybody's unemployed, the dollar's gone to hell in a handbasket where our freedoms and liberties are being eroded nonstop. How's the earth doing? You know, how is Gaia? How's Mother Earth? Let's have a check-in with her. You know, maybe we could all sit around in a circle, bang some little djembe drums, you know, and wear some hemp, you know, necklaces, and just talk to the earth and see how's Earth doing? How are you, Mama Earth? Are you doing okay? Because apparently we should have deep concerns about the environment as a primary consideration, given everything that's going on in the world. And the extending reach of technology into our lives. Yeah, as if you're really worried about that, World Economic Forum. It's technology, again, IBM and the Holocaust by by Edwin Black. It's technology that allows the ease of sorting people into different groups so that one group can be the oppressor, one group can be the oppressed. So one group can go on the offensive, so another group is put on the defensive. The book, this dude wrote a book. The book's main objective is to help us understand what's coming. It has 3 main chapters offering a panoramic overview of the future landscape. Almost as if Klaus Schwab is, what is he? He is the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, meaning he set it up and he calls all the shots. And so he wrote a book on what the future is going to look like. Almost as if he knows what the future is going to look like. It has 3 main chapters, offering a panoramic overview of future landscape. Renee, why are you calling me? I'm live right now. Where did I go? It has 3 main chapters, offering a panoramic overview of the future landscape. The first assesses what the impact of the pandemic will be on 5 key macro categories: the economic, societal, geopolitical, environmental, and technological factors. The second considers the effects in micro terms on specific industries and companies. The third hypothesizes about the nature of possible consequences at the individual level. If somebody's willing to read this book and send me the Cliff Notes, I'd love to see it. But the point here is that COVID-19, as Klaus likes to call it, is this is an orchestrated thing. This is the Hegelian dialectic. The thesis, the disease, the antithesis, the cure to the disease creates the synthesis, the outcome that Klaus Schwab, the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, et al., him and his several hundred of his cronies have decided this is the way the country is going to go. And as we've noted before, per Al Jazeera, the wording, the propagandizing is making people who value individual liberties into domestic terrorists. And COVID-19, per the Great Reset, is concerned about volatile global upheaval. The wording is all here. And so can I say with any certainty whether or not there will be lockdowns in the United States of America? I don't know. I think it's entirely possible. I think it's likely plausible. To what extent? I've heard rumor, and granted, this is rumor. It is completely unsubstantiated. What they call rumored intelligence. I've heard it rumored that in November of 2021, it will be required in the United States of America for domestic airline travel to show proof of vaccination. Already, I believe it was yesterday, the Biden White House eased restrictions on international travel into the United States as long as you can show proof of vaccination. And I think it's just one step forward from there to say we're requiring our international passengers to show proof of vaccination. Why wouldn't we require our domestic passengers? And this coming as fall progresses and people are going to become naturally more sick in the fall anyway. It's a seasonal thing. And as they do, they're going to pump up those numbers and go, look at all these people who are dying of COVID. We now have to show proof of vaccination for air travel, for mass transit. Who knows? To walk into the bank to take your money out of the failing system? Maybe. I don't know. We shall see. But the indicators are there. Getting back to earlier in the brief, what are your threat indicators? There's a whole bunch of meat here if you know how to chew it. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, there's a whole bunch of meat here. And with that, we're going to slip into promotion mode for our companies. I thank you for being here, for supporting the show. Y'all are awesome. If you'd like to know how to support the show further, share this out. This helps us reach around, see what I did there? This helps us get around the YouTube algorithmic robots and do battle with them. Thank you to all the super chats. Tim S., Outhouse Siding Fund, I appreciate you. Thank you. And Mary Flachet, seatbelt argument is invalid. 1, you don't inject seatbelts. 2, manufacturers are held liable if seatbelts fail. 3, dummies are used for seatbelt trial phase. Roger that. Well, I think we are the dummy in this trial phase. I appreciate y'all very much for supporting the show. You can find us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com. You will find thousands of videos there that are exclusive to Patreon. They're Patreon only. It's $5 a month to get started. More if you'd like to give more and get more in return. And we appreciate you very greatly to all of our patrons for being the economic engine of the Bear Nation. Refuge Medical is our company. Handmade, made in America, guaranteed forever. These kits have saved 26 lives in just under 2 years. We're incredibly proud of them. They are on 4 continents with 5 branches of the U.S. Armed Forces. Law enforcement, civilians, firefighters, EMS, sheepdogs, people who want to take personal responsibility for the health and well-being of themselves and their families and their loved ones. And you can get any type of first aid kit you want at refugemedical.com. Let's see, if we go to personal IFACs, individual first aid kits here. Wound care buckets, those are selling like crazy. Bless y'all. Small of the back. This is the SOB kit here. It comes in all these colors. Super cool. This is one here. It weighs as much as one loaded AR magazine, and it's super compact. It works great on a war belt in the small of the back or on a plate carrier. It's got a cat tourniquet that's mounted on the bottom down here that's deployable from either side. Pops right off, but it's retained in there with some shock cord that it won't fall off while you're out there doing the things, fighting the corporate evil world masters, or whatever. And it's got a whole bunch of stuff in it. It's got, it comes with the patch, it comes with the pouch, handmade, made in America, guaranteed forever. If you break it, I want to know about it. We'll send you another one. A Gen 7 cat tourniquet, compact chest seals, combat gauze, Z-fold, flat duct tape, nasopharyngeal airway, mini compressed bandage, a pair of gloves, compressed gauze, antiseptic towelettes, and a permanent marker. All of that is inside of this little tiny pouch right here. And the way this works, so that you can get to it with either hand, you may only have one hand if you need this. Pull it out, pop it open, and all your stuff is stacked in here. Nice, neat, orderly. It's an awesome little kit. Shout out to Patriot Plumber, who helped us develop this. Designed originally for the competitive shooting sports world, because he couldn't find a good kit for his war belt, and he said, hey, you guys are pretty good at making first aid kits. Why don't you make one of these? And so we did, and now this kit is in the hand of 2 different units within JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, for testing and evaluation. And I will say, personally, I was there when they received them. They gobbled them up like fat kids in Snickers bars, man. It was very, very cool to see the level of enthusiasm that they had for these kits. Does that mean they endorse them? No, it does not. It means that these kits are in their hands for testing and evaluation, and we will take lessons learned at a minimum. We will take lessons learned from those actual operators and apply that to all of our kits as we continue to develop them. Copy. Who's going to handle that? I got it. I need 5. Lastly, refugetraining.com. If you have a first aid kit but you don't know how to use it, refugetraining.com. This is also us. We have a 4-hour Stop the Bleed curriculum, what we call our level 1. It's Stop the Bleed plus a whole bunch more. Then we have the 8-hour, what we call the level 3, which builds upon the 4-hour class that allows you to take all the principles you learn in the Responder 1 and put them into real-world use using blue guns, simulation, blue gun simulations, shooting at each other, getting shot at, having to apply tourniquets under stress, doing CASEVAC, moving casualties, making shoot, no shoot decisions, treating yourself, triaging others, active shooter response, and a whole bunch more. It's an absolute blast of a class. Yes, they're expensive classes, but we've also heard from everybody who's come to these classes that they are the best medical classes, including people who've qualified combat lifesaver, including ER doctors, including TEMS, tactical EMS individuals, including law enforcement officers, including Susie homemakers and school principals and truck drivers. Everybody who has taken these classes has been blown away by the quality of instruction. So if you have one of these kits but you don't know how to use it, please visit refugetraining.com. You've got promo codes in the description here on YouTube and on Patreon, and they're different. So on Patreon, you get something different than what's available to the general public here on YouTube. So make sure to check that out in the description. We greatly appreciate y'all supporting our small businesses. It's what allows us to do what we do for free here on YouTube. Y'all are absolutely badass. I love you, Bear Nation. Thank you so much for being a part of what we do. Andrew Stanek, Tactical Coffee, Combat Care, bless you. Lumph, bless you, sister. Tavar, Coal Miner's Daughter, Rick Christopher, Aaron Johnson, B. Oily, all of y'all. You guys are awesome. You girls are awesome. I appreciate you greatly, and I pray that you have a blessed rest of your day. Please share this with somebody you think needs to see it. Shalom, y'all.